Hey guys, it's Kevin again. This is going to be movie reviews for you guys because recently I have actually watched two Netflix movies and, I was going to do several reviews of them, but I figured, what, I watched them pretty close to each other. I might as well just do a double feature talking about both of these films, and we're going to get into it right now. The first film I'm going to talk about is a film that I was very much looking forward to, and that is Jack Black's new film, The Polka King. And what the Polka King is essentially about is we center on the incredible true story of Jean Lewan, who basically was the most successful polka artist at that time, but he was also very shady. He was running a bunch of polka, very shady polka-related activities. He fleeced millions of dollars from all these different investors, and the film is essentially, showing how he was able to do this, and eventually, his rise and fall, and that's really all I'm going to say. So the Polka King in general, I was honestly really looking forward to this movie. I thought this definitely had a lot of potential, especially when it comes to the cast as well as Jack Black, especially after his pretty surprisingly great performance in Jumanji. I was really looking forward to seeing another Jack Black movie again. But at the same time, it's Netflix, and I always take their movies with, just very cautious optimism because of the fact that Netflix not most of the time, but a lot of the time does very much disappoint me. And I did not know how the Polka King was really going to turn out. And yeah, I will say this. The Polka King definitely does have things I enjoyed about it. It is not at all a bad movie, but it's not really that good of a movie either. It is another, unfortunately, very mediocre Netflix movie that really does have quite a few things I do like about it. But we're just getting into it right now, starting off with the cast. And right off the bat, that is easily the best thing about this film. I really think, honestly, everyone did a great job. There isn't a bad performance to be found in here, but easily the best thing this movie has going for it is Jack Black, of course, as John Lewan, who I thought was perfectly casted in this role. Not only does he, of course, have the charm down, and of course, we know how talented Jack Black really is. But he also has the character down to a science. I mean, you genuinely believe that he is this guy who, for the most part, is really good-natured, and he's very successful in polka, and you really are rooting for him in that sense. He's very rootable. This is someone who, he's doing a lot of things that definitely aren't just, but you can't help but kind of, support him and want him to succeed. Again, it's just because of how so damn likable Jack Black was in the role. But he also does give the character a lot more layers, and again, we'll get to the character in a little bit, but I thought he honestly did a really great job here. He really pulled this off, and he really does take the role seriously. I thought this was going to be one of the more, sort of comical roles for Black, and no, for the most part, he does play it straight with this character, and that's something I was definitely very surprised with. I really did love what he did with this role. I thought he was very entertaining and fun to watch, and definitely, like I said, really did elevate this film as a whole for me. And then Jenny Slate, as well as Marla, I thought also was really great here as Jean's wife. You can see that she definitely is very supportive, even though you can tell that some of the stuff he's doing, she isn't 100% on board with. I did really like where they took her character, and I did think her and Jack Black's chemistry was definitely really great. I thought they worked very well together, and I honestly would love to see them collab again in future films, because I thought they worked very well here. And then the rest of the cast I thought also was really good. Jason Schwartzman does a great job as John's best friend. Jackie Weaver in this movie, I honestly really did love. She's John's very cynical mother-in-law she's one of those mothers who will tell you straight to your face what she thinks of you, and she has a lot of funny lines throughout the film. I really did love her here. Jackie Weaver never fails to impress me, but this film, once again, just really showed her comedic abilities, and she was just a lot of fun to watch here. Vanessa bears are good. Really, everyone does a good job here. I can't really think of anyone that gave a bad performance. Also, I found this very interesting, but You know who plays John and Marla's son in this movie? None other than Robert Caprone. Yeah, Robert Caprone. We're talking about the guy who was in Diary of a Wimpy, the kid who played Rowley in Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Yeah, he actually plays their son here, and I gotta say, Robert Cameron actually did a pretty good job. I was really impressed with his performance overall. I think he definitely does have a lot of talent. Like I said, really everyone does a good job, and that's definitely something I will give this film. Now let's get to the directing and the writing, because here's where this film really does falter for me, especially with the directing. Most times I'd say, with a film like this, especially one's based on a true story, the writing is the main problem, but no, I really think the directing is the biggest problem here, because this film is billed as a comedy. It is. And, I was expecting to get some laughs out of the film, and while I definitely did get some from Jackie Weaver, I just didn't really get a lot of it, and it wasn't enough. To be honest with you, I did not really laugh a lot during this movie because I didn't really feel there was anything that funny happening, and I don't know if that was the intent, where they were trying to play it safe and it was more dry humor, but if there was, it really fell flat. I mean, I wasn't laughing very much at all, except, like I said, stuff that Jackie Weaver said, and maybe a few lines that Black said here and there. But to be honest with you, I think it was less of the actual lines and more of just Jack Black and Jackie Weaver's delivery. These are very talented people, and they definitely know how to do comedy very well. And I think because of that, it was more my enjoyment of them as actors than it actually was the lines that they were saying. So yeah, I really did not think the humor worked here very well. I did think the story overall, the dramatic stuff, it definitely does, they do handle that well. And yeah, so the film, like I said, the tone just does not really work, and when your film's supposed to be a comedy, I mean, everything else kind of falls flat in comparison. First off, right off the bat, the story. As much as I did care about John LaVaughn as a character, similar to the directing, I think it's more because of Jack Black's likability. I think it's because he is so great in this role, and he injects so much into this role that you can't help but feel for this character. You can't help but get into this character. You can't help but want to know more about him. Unfortunately, the story they're telling here just isn't all that interesting. It's really not, and after a while, it does start to get very repetitive. There are so many scenes where he just goes to these specific people who are giving him money, and he gets involved in some shady scheme, and then something happens, and you don't know what's going to happen here. I just did not really get into that side of the story. I was much more into the Polka side of it all, and him and sort of the struggles he was going through with Jason Schwartzman's character. Jason Schwartzman is very conflicted in this film. He wants to, he doesn't know if he wants to stay in the Polka band. I mean, there's a lot of stuff they do there. Unfortunately, the movie's not really focused on it. It's much more focused on all of the embezzlement and the Ponzi schemes and all this other stuff that, LaVaughn was doing at the time that, again, I just did not find very interesting. I did not find that story very interesting at all. And, again, I think because of that's 90% of the movie, well, not 90%, but it's definitely a good portion of the movie, again, it definitely did hinder my enjoyment of the film, which is a shame because there is definitely I definitely did have a lot of fun with this film at points. I mean, when this movie is just Jean and all of them just kind of jamming out and playing these songs, it's a lot of fun, and I definitely did enjoy seeing that. But to be honest with you, besides John, there really wasn't anyone else in this film that I really did care about. Everyone else I just kind of found to be just cogs, really. They're just cogs in the film. They don't really do much of anything, especially Jenny Slate. Jenny Slate is incredibly wasted here. I mean, she has this subplot kind of in the film, and nothing really happens with her till, I'd say, the third act, and she definitely does have good stuff there, but, it happened in the third act, and I was like, oh, why couldn't that have been throughout the whole movie? I really wanted more from her, and it definitely did let me down, I have to say. Jason Schwartzman as well is incredibly wasted. I mean, that's nothing compared to how much he's wasted here. His character, he just doesn't really feel like one. He doesn't really feel like he has a place in this movie, and his whole subplot feels like it's in a completely different movie, especially this other subplot that starts to develop in, like, the second half of the film, which is barely touched upon again. Again, there's just really nothing for him to do here, and it's very unfortunate. There's a lot of talented people, but there's really, again, not much of a story here, and that definitely did let me down, I have to say. And like I said, you know, Jack Black does have really good delivery, and I thought he was a lot of fun to watch. The cinematography, I do think, was pretty good. You know, there really wasn't anything that great to it. It's a Netflix film. It looks like your standard Netflix movie. The score, I genuinely really do love the score. I thought there was a lot of fun, musical numbers and a lot of great scenes, and this is one of those films where if I were to rewatch it, I wouldn't. I'd just go back and watch some of the musical scenes, because that's really what I did enjoy. I enjoyed the, again, I enjoyed the certain gigs that the polka band would play at. I enjoyed just seeing Jean, you know, speak to the crowd. He was very good in interviews. You know, there are some good scenes with that. I definitely did enjoy that overall. Also, another big problem for me with this movie is throughout the film, like I said, Jean as a character, he is definitely very likable, but you also see there's this sort of darker side of the character, and this side that is a little bit more vindictive, and this side that is a little bit less approachable, and as good as Jack Black was, I just didn't really buy it. I did not buy that the character that Jack Black was playing would have this sort of, not sadistic, but have this more, you know, just darker side to him. I just did not buy that that would happen. I just did not really feel like it fit in this film. So, like I said, overall, I was just very conflicted when it came to this, because I really like Jack Black in this role, and I really do like, you know, a lot of these actors. Also, the pacing of this film, I forgot to say, is very slow. The first act I did overall enjoy. I will definitely say that. I was starting to get into it, but once that second act hits, it gets really slow, and it really does start to get boring at points. And if it weren't for those polka numbers, I probably would have completely tuned out of this movie, to be honest with you, because anything, again, going on with, you know, regarding John and all of the money troubles he was having and all the shady things he was doing, again, I just simply did not care about it. I did not find it interesting, and it's unfortunate because there definitely is a lot of talent here. So, like I said, this very much is just a very mediocre Netflix film. It's got a really great Jack Black performance. It does have some really fun moments overall, but just in general, it's nothing that I really could ever find myself going back to. Jack Black's performance is way too good for this film, honestly. This movie really does show his range, but again, that's really the best thing I could say about it. And I know I'm sounding repetitive, basically just as repetitive as this movie, fittingly, but still, you know, that's really the best thing I can recommend. The cast here is great. Unfortunately, the movie surrounding them just isn't nearly as good in comparison, and that really did disappoint me overall. So like I said, guys, Polka King, nothing all that great overall, and I am going to give the Polka King overall a C+. Alright, so the second movie I'm going to be talking about, the other Netflix movie I did watch, is none other than The Open House. And what The Open House is essentially about is we center on this mother and son played by Dylan Minnette and Piercey Dalton. And basically, these two characters have gone through a pretty big tragedy. Logan's father recently has died, and these two are essentially trying to pick up the pieces, and they end up purchasing this new mansion. They move into her sister's new mansion, and once they get there, they seem to sense that something else may possibly be haunting them there, and that's really all I'm going to say. So, unlike the Polka King, I knew nothing going into The Open House. All I knew about this movie is that it had Dylan Minnette, and that it was a horror film on Netflix, and that was enough for me. Why? Because Dylan Minnette has proven himself to be a very capable actor, and the last horror film I saw him in was Don't Breathe, and he was incredible in that, and that was an incredible horror film. So, needless to say, my expectations for this were pretty high, and and also the last thing I saw Minnette on Netflix was 13 Reasons Why, and of course he absolutely killed it on there, so I definitely was really looking forward to this movie overall. And unfortunately, I have to say that while The Open House definitely does have some good things about it, this is definitely a really bad movie. This is easily one of the worst Netflix movies I've seen. It took a very interesting concept and quickly, completely ruins it, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But first, we're going to talk about the cast. And let's be positive here for a second, because the cast in general is easily the best thing about this movie. There really isn't any bad acting here. I think, honestly, everyone does do a really good job. Let's first talk about Minnette as a character of Logan, who, like I said, he's proven himself since Goosebumps to be a really capable actor, and he gives another really good performance here. Logan himself is going through a pretty big tragedy. He's got a lot of bad blood between him and his mother, and he does do a really good job with that. Any scene where he has to be, sort of unnerved or, some sort of emotion that, whether he's scared or something like that, he does a really good job there. He definitely does sell this character very well. He's a very good actor, and I think he definitely did do a pretty good job in this role overall. And then Piercey Dalton as well as Naomi, I thought also was really great. You can tell throughout the film, there's a lot of ill will she has towards Logan, and I did think that she, like I said, gave a very strong performance. I really did like where they went with her character throughout the film. I thought she definitely did do a really good job. I thought these two in general had very good chemistry. They definitely do carry the film, and definitely do save it from what the rest of the film really ends up being, which we'll get to in a little bit. But the rest of the cast here overall, like I said, I thought everyone did do a pretty good job. There's no one else I'd really say is amazing in this movie, but I did think everyone was pretty serviceable. They do what they need to do, and I think that definitely that is something that did help this film. Now let's get to the directing and the writing, because here's where we have the major issue with this film. Now, similar to the Polka King, this movie is billed as a horror movie, and similar to how the Polka King didn't really make me laugh, this movie didn't really scare me, and that's not necessarily a problem. I read an article recently about how horror films' main objective is not to scare you. It's more about just to creep you out and give you this atmospheric, sense and make you feel very just disturbed, and I would definitely agree with that. I think if you have a really good story and you have a lot of really complex characters, you can make a really good film. However, we'll get to that with the writing in a little bit. The tone in this movie, it just does not work as a horror film. The horror element feels so unrepresented here. It just feels like an afterthought. There's really no point in this movie where I was even creeped out by anything that was going on. There's so many jump scares. There's so many again, it's just not scary. There's not a single moment in this movie where I actually felt, where I felt on the edge of my seat, or I felt really where I felt really engrossed in what was going on. So, yeah, the horror really didn't work here. What I was much more attached to was the mystery of it all. I do think that the mystery aspect was well done, and I do think that there was some good character drama here and there, so I will definitely give that with the directing. The writing is definitely the biggest problem with this film, because if you guys haven't noticed, I haven't said a lot about our two main characters, Logan and Naomi, and that's because aside from that one specific tragedy that they've gone through, of course, that being the death of, Logan's father, there's not really much else with these two characters. They're just kind of in the film, they're going through this scenario, and you don't really care that much for them, and it wouldn't be a problem if the film wasn't so slow-paced, and again, that's more of an editing problem, but the film really does take its time with this story, and you'd think it's because they're developing the characters, they're trying to get into this mystery overall, but there really isn't anything to these characters. I mean, especially Logan is very severely underwritten. You feel like he should have a lot more development, and he just doesn't. And I kept waiting and waiting for some sort of reveal with him to happen, and it just doesn't happen in the film, and it definitely let me down. And like I said, some of the best scenes in the film are just Logan and Naomi and their sort of grudge for each other. Because, sure, there's a lot of again, obviously, going through what they did has really taken a toll on their relationship, and you definitely do see this throughout the film, and I do think, like I said, those scenes were very well handled. They did do a very good job in those specific scenes, but there's just not much going on with these characters, and that definitely did hurt the film overall. I wanted to get invested in these characters, I wanted something with them, but there's really nothing there. Also, the horror element of this movie, like I said, it feels like an afterthought. There's a mystery throughout this film, and there definitely is stuff that they do set up, but the film never delivers on it. I mean, the mystery, it just never really feels like it's prominent in the film. It always feels like it's just beginning. It always feels like, oh, this is just the beginning of what's going on. Like, there's just the surface level. There's a much deeper explanation, and we're going to get to that in the third act. And again, I'll talk about the third act in a little bit. But the mystery, it's never nearly as compelling as the movie thinks it is. It's never really that engaging, and that's again because the fact that the movie is just so vague with this mystery. I mean, the whole thing is revolving around some guy that's watching them, and some guy who's clearly in the open house with them, and we don't, who's clearly in the house with them. I mean, we've seen this a million times. It's very generic, it's very by the numbers, and there's really not much here that this movie does different, and that definitely did disappoint me because I think there were definitely opportunities for them to do something different, and they just really didn't in the film, specifically with the character of Martha. Martha's this character who, they come into contact with her, we can see that she is someone who wants to help them out, she sees the tragedy they're going through, and she is very all over the place in this film. There are parts of this movie where it seems like she's on their side, but then there are parts of this movie where it seems like she doesn't. And I really thought the film was trying to place the blame on her, try to make us suspect that maybe she could be behind this. But again, it never feels like it's in the forefront of this movie. It always feels like this is just an idea that the writers had in the back of their head, and they're really just doing this to pad the movie out because, again, there's not really much of a story here. And the first, I'd say, hour of this film, I was legitimately bored. I really was. I was legitimately bored with what was going on. I really did not care about the story. It's just not very exciting, and I was not really into it at all. The cinematography here is good. I will definitely say it. Cinematography is good. You do get that dread throughout the film. The winter setting, I do think, works pretty well here. It gives you this very eerie vibe, and I do think that worked overall. The score is one of the blandest horror scores I've heard in a while. There's really nothing to this score. I can't hum you it. There's nothing that stuck with me. It's, like I said, very bland in that way. The editing as well, like I said, the film is extremely slow paced, and it really did not need to be. And there's so many things that, so many horror cliches here that have been present in other films, but just really bothered me here. Whether it be, oh, they're going to these investigators and they don't believe them. They say that it could just be neighbors, or that they don't need to worry about this, or there's a sound and nothing's happening and you don't see this figure. I mean, again, these are tropes we've seen in horror movies before, but those horror movies have had much better stories and much more compelling characters, and when the movie doesn't really have that to begin with, is if it had at least an intriguing mystery, then I wouldn't really hurt the film. And again, this really would not be a problem if it had maybe some payoff in the third act. And let me just tell you right now, the third act of this movie is one of the worst I have seen in a while. It is one of the biggest fuck yous to a horror film I have seen in quite some time, because you're waiting for that big reveal. We get to the climax, we think something's going to happen, we think maybe we're going to see something with this character, we're going to get into that backstory, why is he or she after this family, what's really going on there. We never get to it. We never do. The film screeches to a halt. It goes in this one direction that makes absolutely no sense, and it just ends. It literally just ends, and it's one of those things where I feel like they had this idea, but they didn't know how to end it, so they're just like, all right, let's just throw this in here and then we can just end the damn thing, because it's clear they did not care. It did not seem like the writers paid any attention whatsoever to what was going on. The ending, like I said, makes no sense whatsoever, and the way the movie ends is just so infuriating. You're waiting for those answers, and especially because the mystery is so vague, you think there'd be a reason for it, but no, it just truly seemed like the writers had no idea where they wanted to go with this. They just had this simple concept, and they did not know how to make it into a film, and that legitimately pissed me off. I was so upset with what they ended up doing there. They could have had they had so many more opportunities to dive more into this mystery, to dive more in these characters, and they just completely squandered it. There was no care whatsoever put into this film, at least from what I got, and especially from the ending. It just did not seem like they cared. It seemed like they just wanted to wrap the thing up, and then they just ended it, and it really showed. If that's the case, it really does show here, because the movie feels like very low effort, and it's unfortunate because we do have actors that I think were willing to go there. We have a story here that is somewhat compelling, but the film never really does anything interesting with it. It never dives into these characters. It never really creates that much of a mystery to begin with, and at the end, it just left me very frustrated. It left me very annoyed. It made me wish I didn't watch it. Honestly, it really didn't, and again, really made me question why Netflix is signing on to all of these films. I mean, this is probably one of the most generic films they could have signed on to, and Netflix usually makes some really good horror movies. I mean, this is the company behind Hush, and, well, not company, but distributor behind Hush and Gerald's Game, and a lot of other really well-done horror films. I'm really surprised that this turned out as bad as it did, but this really is a terrible movie with, like I said, one of the most frustrating, head-scratching finales I've seen in quite some time. So the first two acts of this movie, I'm like, this was just a very boring film, and it was very forgettable. The last act has turned into a legitimately terrible movie. It does have some good performances here and there, but I really was very pissed off with this film overall, and I'm definitely going to give the open house overall a D+. And overall, guys, that's it for my review of both of these Netflix films, which unfortunately neither of which I was positive for. I was hoping that one I would be positive and one I wouldn't, or, you know, vice versa, or, you know, I would be positive on both of them, but that's definitely not the case. Both of these films I honestly would not recommend. Polka King I'd recommend for Jack Black's performance, but please don't see The Open House. It's a waste of time, honestly. I definitely don't. You know, I definitely am not upset if you guys never get around to it, because it's definitely a waste of time. Either way, guys, that's it for my review. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you guys thought of either of these movies you have seen them. Not really seeing a lot of reviews for either of them, so if you have seen them, check them out. Definitely let me know what you guys thought of them if you do. But that's my review. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.